Industry experts, he discovered how to become an impactful speaker, trainer, and coach. Michael has helped speakers on Michael has helped speakers on 5 continents and written 7 storytelling books. He is a speaker, trainer, and the founder of Speaking CPR. He lives in Ohio with his family and the overlords of their house, Sky and Relay, the super chihuahuas. And now let's welcome Michael Davis, our KO of the day.
I must start by saying, Marcus, I did not know how you had gotten the book. I had no idea what you were going to say. Please tell your mother I love her dearly. I had no idea. And also the bookstore that recommended it. So thank you for sharing that. I did not know that story. What did you like to do when you were a kid? Me, I love to make people laugh, love to entertain others and help make them laugh and just be the spotlight, be the guy in the spotlight. So that's why one day during indoor recess in first grade, I had this thought. I'm bored. I'm going to get on that desk and have some fun. So imagine you're standing in the middle of a classroom of 6 and 7-year-olds. The teacher has stepped out of the room temporarily. They're an energetic group. Think about what you're seeing in that room, what you're hearing. If you were in that room that day with me, you would have seen me standing on top of my desk. I was having a ball. I was up there telling silly little 6-year-old jokes, making sounds, laughing with my friends, dancing, having a great time. I was laughing and my friends were laughing with me. What do you think happened next? If you thought, yeah, your teacher walked back in the room, you're absolutely right. She walked in, took one look at me and said, well, Michael, since you love standing on your desk so much, I'm going to let you do it during nap time so everyone can see you. And I thought, oh, cool, I get to do this some more. 2 hours later, the lights are off in the classroom. You can hear the rain pelting the window. You can smell the chocolate chip cookies and the cupcakes that we're going to enjoy later that afternoon for a classmate's birthday. But I'm not thinking about any of that because for the last 10 minutes, I've been standing on my desk in the dark. When I first stepped on the desk, my teacher looked up and said, Michael, don't move, don't laugh, don't make any noises, just stand there. Do you understand me? Oh, okay. And for the first couple of minutes, it was okay. But then I started to get restless, thinking, oh, I'm bored. And that's when I looked down and I saw my classmate. Do you think he was sleeping? No, he was looking up at me. And another classmate. And another classmate. You look stupid. Pretty soon, it felt like everyone in that classroom was looking up at me and laughing at me. And all I could think was, I want to get down. I won't be bad anymore. I just want to get down. I'll be good. This went on for 35 minutes. And when my teacher finally said, you can get down now, I hope you've learned your lesson. Oh, I had. I told myself, never stand in front of people again. I never want people to laugh at me again. And for the next 25 years, that thought kept me from participating in so many activities. I never voluntarily stood in front of a group. I wanted to join the band when I was in elementary. I loved playing the trumpet, but I always knew if I made a mistake, they would laugh at me. I never raised my hand in class, even though I typically knew the answer, because I knew if it was wrong, they would laugh at me. And this carried on for 25 years. It was as if I was still on that desk, emotionally on that desk. And then came the day when I was 31 years old and I was a financial planner. And my boss sat me down in his office. And part of my job as a financial planner was to give retirement planning workshops to attract new clients. That's the ultimate irony. So we had this dialogue for a while, and then he held up these evaluation forms and he said, these are evaluations from your last couple of workshops. You know what? I'm not even going to have you read them. Here's the bottom line, and I'm quoting him. You're a lousy speaker, and your stories, they suck. You need to fix this problem because, Michael, when we hired you, we told you part of your job was to get people in this door, new clients. You're not doing that. Fix this or else. That was the day I had to deal with the desk. Within 1 week, I knew if I didn't fix this problem, I would lose my job. Within 1 week, I had attended my first Toastmasters meeting. Now, I went in thinking, I'll probably do this for about 6 months. I'll figure it out, and then I'll move on with my life. 28 years and 2 months later, here I am talking with my Toastmasters friends from all over the world, and especially Canada. Who would have known it would brought me to this point? And I've picked up so many lessons along the way. And you may be thinking, now, why did you tell me that story about being on a desk in first grade? I promise, stick with me. We're going to refer back to this story periodically as we make some points about storytelling. But what we're going to start with is that desk is going to carry us through this entire presentation. But, whoops. What I learned along the way, and I picked up some fabulous mentors, world champions of public speaking, certified speaking professionals, Hall of Fame speakers. I've been very fortunate on my journey because I became a sponge. I wanted to learn everything I possibly could. And what they taught me was that the key to effective communication is effective storytelling. See, I've learned that every speaker can be a confident, influential, and persuasive storyteller. We just need to know the proven tools that are used by the world's best communicators. I knew none of that when I first joined Toastmasters. I thought you're born a great speaker or you're not. That's just the way it is. Well, if you've been in Toastmasters any length of time, you know that's not true. Some of my mentors, world champions, are introverts who were terrified of groups for a long time before they learned this skill. So in this presentation, you're going to discover why stories are influential. Number 2, how to create a deeper bond with your audience when you talk with them. 3, you'll learn why your knowledge can hurt your story. And number 4, you'll discover how to leave audiences wanting more. Now, if you fail to incorporate these ideas, your stories will tend to be forgotten. But if you do use them, your stories will resonate, influence, and inspire. So let's start with a question. And Marcus, if you don't mind, I'm going to have you handle the chat box. In the chat box, just write a quick sentence. Why do you believe stories, effective stories, work so well with audiences? And Marcus, jump in with just some of the answers you're seeing.
It influences people.
Influences people, okay.
They make you relatable.
Relatable.
It creates a deep impact on people. And it makes the story to connect, engages the emotion, connects with people. We are built to be receptive to stories, and stories stick. They engage our memories and emotional minds, not just our thinking brains.
Good. I'm going to stop you there. Those are all good answers. And there's not a right or wrong here. By the way, this is going to be audience participation throughout. It's just not going to be me talking at you for 45 minutes. All very good answers. Now we're going to go a little bit deeper to understand why stories work so well. Anthropologists, sociologists have discovered, well, before I share you that, here's a problem that we face in the modern world. And that is that on our laptops, on our desktops, on our TVs, and in our cell phones, we can get information 24 hours a day. Got a problem? Google it, YouTube it. That'll solve your problem, right? Right? No, not right. Because if that was the solution, you and I wouldn't be here this morning, this afternoon, this evening, right? We'd be doing something else. If it was just as simple as going to Google or YouTube. The challenge that I'm seeing, and both as a communicator, speaker, is that audiences today, the world is suffering from information overload. There's so many ideas and concepts, so much of it contradictory that we don't know what to do. It leaves us feeling like this. You've been in a situation where you're getting so much information, you just want to run from the room. Well, the way we can solve this problem for our audiences is to tell relatable stories. So deeper dive into why stories are so powerful. Let's go back in time. Anthropologists and social scientists have gone back in time, and the theory is that our ancestors, even before we had formal language, were using storytelling through drawings, even lines in the sand, whatever, to tell their story about their history, their culture, their morals, and their ethics. This is how they passed on all of these, through storytelling. Because of this, our brains, and it was mentioned earlier, our brains evolved to the point where they started to react to emotional and sensory rich stories. Brain scientists have determined there are neurotransmitters that are released in the brain when we hear those types of stories. The first one is cortisol. If you're not familiar with cortisol, that is the stress neurotransmitter. Now, you may be wondering, Michael, why would we want to stress out our audience? They're already stressed out enough. Good point. Here's why we want to release some cortisol into their system, though. The purpose of storytelling is to connect us with our audience. Connection comes through emotion. Emotion in storytelling is born from conflict. Until you've got conflict in your story, you got nothing. There's not going to be any emotion. If I had told you in the opening story about the day I stood up on the desk and had a great time, the teacher never walked in, I never got in trouble and stepped down, you'd be like, okay, what was the purpose of that? Right? There's no story there. So it's important that we release some cortisol into our audience members. Now, what we don't want to do is leave them stressed out by the end of the speech or the story. That's not good. So we do want to give them that release, but we start with creating cortisol. Second, oxytocin is released into the body. Oxytocin has been referred to as the bonding or the trust hormone. And it's difficult to earn people's trust today. We just went through the elections here in the United States. And yeah, it's that time of year when all the politicians say what they say, but we don't trust them because many of them turn around and violate their promises right away. So we live in a highly distrusting world. At least that's the sense we have a lot here in the States. If you want to build that up, create a story that builds some trust, and you'll hear more about that later. The next neurochemical or neurotransmitter is dopamine. Dopamine has many functions, but one of those is it helps motivate our audiences. I'm a huge believer that one of our roles as speakers and storytellers is to give other people hope. If we give them hope, they are more motivated to take action. So a well-told story will create that dopamine release that gives them that motivation to take action. And then the fourth neurotransmitter we see a lot is endorphins. Many people are familiar with endorphins with regard to a term called the runner's high. It releases that high energy in us, but endorphins also give pain relief, or as a storyteller, stress relief. We've created stress early in our story. We've got to relieve that tension by the end, give our audience hope. So that's what the endorphins do. We call this, with cortisol, oxytocin, dopamine, and endorphins, the brain code. When you have a well-told story, it's emotional and it's sensory rich, you've tapped into the brain code. One of my favorite insights into the brain and storytelling comes from this book. Highly recommended. I know I've got many book club members here, so we'll go. This is another book you should read if you haven't. John Medina. Dr. Medina says a well-told story is a lot like taking a Post-it note, sticking it on the brain, and the Post-it note says, "Hey, remember this." That's what a well-told story does. It makes a point that is easily memorable to the listener. Think about some of the most important lessons you've learned in your life. Chances are very good there's a story tied to them. All right. Now, the point here is not to make you a brain scientist or a social scientist or an anthropologist. I share that backstory with you on why we tell stories and what the impact on the brain and our history, because the next time you're in a situation, a communication situation or a presentation, and you're just not feeling the connection, have a series of stories to fall back on that you can go to at the very least might change up the whole tenor of the conversation. Over time, you're going to get a tip here in just a few minutes on how to get those stories. But what these benefits to storytelling are to you is, first of all, you've already heard about trust. It's very difficult to earn trust, especially when you're meeting people for the first time. Whether you're in a one-on-one situation or a group, your story can do that. Well, yes or no? And I'm not asking this question for to pat me on the back. I'm serious. In the chat box, put a Y or an N. If hearing that opening story, if you had never heard of me before, knew nothing about me, do you feel a little bit more trust with me based on that opening story of me standing on a desk? Marcus, you can keep an eye on that for me. I'd appreciate it. Just look for the Y's and the N's. And it's okay if it's no. Be candid.
All yeses so far, many of them.
Now, I'm going to put my business hat on for just a second. I teach my business leaders that, and I share that story with them. And I ask them the same question: do you have a little bit more trust in me? And then I ask the question, why do you trust me in business? I didn't tell you anything about my company. I didn't tell you about the work I do. I didn't tell you about any of my clients, none of that, but you still trust me. And they'll often say, because it was a relatable experience. I was embarrassed when I was a kid one time. That can happen that fast. You can break down a lot of these walls that we have today of distrust by telling that kind of story. You will be more engaging with people. It's not just reading a bunch of facts and figures and statistics. People are right there with you. They're engaged in the conversation. You can become more persuasive through storytelling and also feel more confidence. The day I understood and discovered the keys to storytelling was when I became a much more confident, not just speaker and storyteller, but person. I realized that I had something of value to share with others and that they could benefit from it. And that's what a big part of my coaching is all about, is teaching people these skills so they walk out with more confidence, because we tend to buy into those speakers who are more confident, don't we? All right, those are the benefits. In your communication tool belt, storytelling is to me, it's your most versatile and most powerful tool, whether you're in sales, whether you're in recruiting, looking for new employees, you're in a leadership role, you're out there funding, trying to get money for your company. I consider storytelling to be the Swiss Army knife of communication. It can work in so many different areas for you. Now, when we meet individuals one-on-one, or if we're in a speaking situation, especially in business, there are certain questions that audience members have. They may never ask you directly, but they're in their minds. And what we want to do is answer those questions as quickly as possible. Here are the questions. Number one, who are you? What's your backstory? What's your company's background? Number two, do you get me? Do you understand my problem? Number three, are you an expert in your field? Number four, can you solve my problem? It's great that you have this background and expertise, but it's all about me now. This is what the audience is thinking. Can you solve my problem? Number five, do you have a specific plan to solve my problem? Can I trust you? I've already talked about trust. And do I like you? Now, sometimes when I work with clients, this is an issue, this whole likability. It's nice to be liked by an audience. That's important. But it's even more important to be like your audience. Think about speakers you've heard, especially those that have taken the stage or the camera as experts, who are clearly well-known and have accomplished a lot in their field, but you felt no connection to that person. Maybe you didn't trust them. Maybe you didn't buy into their message. If you ever felt that way, it was most likely because you were not like that person. They didn't make themselves like you. So being like your audience is very important, because that's where relatability steps in. It's one of the biggest reasons I start my presentations with that story of being on a desk as a 6-year-old. It had such an impact on me for so long. And most people I meet have had a miserable experience in front of a group. We're immediately bonding right off the bat. The way to answer these 7 questions as quickly as possible is through storytelling. Now, an important idea that I try to share, especially with my business people, is that stories do not make the sale for you. And when I use the word sale, keep in mind, all those roles I put before: sales, leadership, recruiting, funding, you're selling. It may not always be an exchange of goods and services, but you're selling ideas all the time. If you've ever been a parent, you know you're selling ideas all the time. If you've ever been in a relationship, you're always selling ideas. Let's go to this restaurant versus that one. Let's buy this car versus that one. We're always selling. But the story alone is not going to make the sale. What it does in an information overload world is it cracks a door open. It helps you stand out so that people will say, all right, I trust you. I like you. Let's have a conversation beyond this. That's what it is. Storytelling is a great door opener. Now, here's your first tip. I mentioned this earlier. You want to create, try to convince my clients that you want to have a bank of stories to lean on. So my tip for you, originally, I used to tell people, create a story file. And I do this on my phone. What I do at the end of every day is I have a particular file and I call it my story/moments file. I have an alarm on my phone. It goes off toward the end of the day. And it's just a reminder to say what happened during the day that could be a story. Now, for years, I called it the story file, but then I realized one day, it's not the story so much that we remember, it's the moments in those that create the story. So my first tip to you is set an alarm on your phone, have a file somewhere, whether you put it on your phone, your desktop, your laptop, paper, doesn't matter to me, whatever works best for you, and create a moments file, because those moments are the seeds for memorable stories. Create that habit and you will have that bank of stories to go on. As I mentioned earlier, when you're in one of those conversations, you're in a presentation, you find it's stuck, it's not going anywhere, you don't feel connected with the audience, pull out one of those stories. It will serve a great purpose for you. Now, these are just 7 ideas for you. You can get these anywhere, but family, friends, career experiences, childhood memories, challenges you're currently facing, financial success or struggles, recreation. What do you like to do for fun? Those are the seeds for your best stories. Now that you've heard about the why, let's get into these 3 pillars of high impact storytelling. The 3 pillars are get emotional, the curse of knowledge, and the lunch buffet effect. So let's talk about this idea of getting emotional. In the chat box, please let me know, what does it mean to you when you see the phrase get emotional? And again, Marcus, if you don't mind. Just reading.
Get connected with the audience, being authentic, to be moved, humility, tears, speak to the heart.
Good. All right.
Stir emotions in the audience.
Stir emotion. Okay, there you go. So here, all good answers, especially the one about tears, because it's like setting me up for my next point. When I was young in Toastmasters, my early days, I invested in a cassette tape series. I've been around that long, cassette tapes. And one of the speakers I listened to was actually a Hall of Fame member of the National Speakers Association. And in his presentation, he said, if you want people to remember your message, you got to get them laughing 1 minute and crying the next. And I thought, well, I'm out. I'll never succeed as a speaker at a high level. Why would I say that? Because that's not my style of speaking. I'm not the kind of speaker that gets people crying very often. Sometimes I get them laughing, which is good, but that's just not my style. Some speakers, it's just natural to who they are, but it's not who I am. So for the first 2 years I was in Toastmasters, I struggled with this idea. And I had this limiting belief, I'll never be a successful speaker. But then one day I had the opportunity to see this man speak. He is David Brooks, the 1990 world champion of public speaking. Meeting David changed the trajectory, not just of my speaking and my Toastmasters experience, it changed the direction of my life for many reasons, which I don't have time to get into here. But what changed for me that day was when David said, there are 6 common emotions that human beings share. And if you include at least one of these emotions in your stories, include at least one of them, it could be a combination of 2, 3, or all 6, you will have an impact on your audience. And then he showed the 6 emotions: happiness, anger, sadness, surprise, disgust, and fear. And as soon as he showed those 6, I thought, I can do this. I can include those 6. There's nothing artificial. I see, trying to make people cry artificially feels inauthentic and disingenuous to the audience, and they get it every time. They know that you're not being authentic. But I can incorporate those 6 into my stories. And to prove it, let's go back to the desk story. In the chat box, more audience participation. Please put 1, 2, or all 6 of those emotions that you felt while listening to the story of me on the desk or me in my boss's office. Marcus, when you see a few, let me know.
Sadness, anger, fear, happiness, surprise. Fear, happiness, surprise. Those pop up a lot. Anger for the teacher.
There you go. Notice how every answer is not the same. Some people feel 1, some feel 2, some feel all 6. The reason we incorporate this, and again, it's not an artificial incorporation. I just told my story in a way that triggers some of those emotions. We are dealing with so many people in our audience. We speak to so many different types of audiences that some will feel one emotion more than the other. But that's why it's so good to have these 6, because you'll appeal to many people on many different levels. So think about, as you're creating your story, And this is a critical part. It's being part of Toastmasters. One of the challenges I see with my Toastmasters friends is that too often we hand an evaluator a book and say, give me feedback. If you want to succeed as a storyteller at a high level, start taking more direct, more control of your evaluations. Have them give you the feedback from the manual, but also ask for specific feedback. What emotions did you experience during my story? What was the main point of my story? What was confusing? What really resonated with you? Ask those kinds of questions in addition to what the manual asks, and you're going to get much more pinpointed on how your story is impacting others. It's very difficult to change a story if you're not sure how it's impacting people emotionally. The key to doing that is to ask them. They'll give you the answers. And when you get the feedback, especially if you got one evaluator, great, you're going to have your formal evaluation. Ask every member of your club these questions and see what kind of answers you get. When you see consistent answers, then you know that you're hitting certain emotions. Or if you ask people, what is my point? And you get 20 different answers, you got some work to do. But if you're getting fairly consistent responses, you know, okay, my message is getting through. So take control of that evaluation with those type of specific questions. That's one aspect of getting emotional. There's another one. I call it, oh, don't want to forget to share this with you. One of the best pieces of advice I ever heard or insights about storytelling is the story is about you, but it's for your audience. What does that mean? And you don't have to put anything in the chat box here, but think about when I was sharing the story of being on the desk, you were hearing that experience. Did you for a moment flash back to your past about an embarrassing experience you had, or a teacher who mistreated you, or a boss who spoke disrespectfully to you, even just for a moment? If you did, then my story served its purpose. It created an emotional tie-in between the two of us. We don't want to tell stories that get people running to their phones because now we've lost them. We do want to tell stories that get them going through their mental filing cabinet of all those experiences they've had in the past, because that's where we create the relatability. They feel like you're like them, they relate to you, and they start to trust you more. All right, that's first part of getting emotional. The second part of creating emotion with your story is called vaccinating your story. Now, disclaimer right now, this ain't that vaccination that the world has been arguing about for the last 2.5 years. That's a different topic. This is a specific one about storytelling that everybody can agree on. What is VAX? VAX is visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and smell. If you're a medical person, you don't have to write to me. I know that the correct term for smell is olfactory, but vaccination doesn't work for my metaphor, and neither does vaccination. So to keep it a more meaningful and memorable metaphor, I made it vax with a couple of adjustments. So think about this in the story that you heard. And let's just take a minute or two. In the chat box, what did you see while hearing that story? What did you hear while listening to the story? What did you feel? What did you smell? Or what did you taste? It might be one, it might be two, it might be all five.
It was visual, kind of a desk, they say.
Okay.
Smell, my childhood classroom, a taste, the rain outside, the smell of cookies, saw you standing on a desk and your friends were teasing you, classroom, and so on. Smell of wooden rulers.
All right. Again, thank you, Marcus. Thank you for helping out. One, I mentioned this with emotion. You're going to touch different audience members differently. I am an auditory person. I remember things I hear, always have. Most people are visual. The key to this aspect of including what I call vaccinating your story is you don't want to overload the audience with details. I only had 3 details in that story. Our job as storytellers is to give just enough information and let the audience paint in the rest of the picture. I didn't tell you how old my teacher was. I didn't tell you her ethnic background. I didn't tell you the makeup of the classroom, how many kids were in the class. I just asked a couple of questions to let you start to create the picture. I discussed myself being on the desk, the reaction of my classmates. And then what happened was you created a movie in your mind. And Marcus, some of the answers, did people write taste?
Yeah, we've got, let me see, we've got a smell. Yes, there was a taste of the smell of the cookies, someone did say taste as well.
Okay, now here's the thing. I never said how the cookies tasted or what the cupcakes tasted like, did I? I just said you could smell the cupcakes and the chocolate chip cookies. It triggered your sense of smell, but for some of you, it also triggered taste. You could taste that chocolate chip cookie. Oh my gosh, gotta have one. I'm sorry if you're hearing this right before lunch or breakfast or dinner. We'll be done soon. You can go eat. But that's the power of the vaccinating your story. People are right there with you. Like, oh my gosh, I can taste this. I can feel it. I can smell it. That's what we want our stories to do. And you can do it without giving a long backstory with multiple details. We are not here to write a novel. We're here to give just enough for people to fill in the rest and be on the journey with us. That's the power of the vaccination and the emotion. So you've heard about emotion now, how to get people emotionally involved. But emotion alone is not enough. There's a big challenge I see with a lot of storytellers. And if you avoid this next problem, you're going to have a challenge in connecting with your audience. In fact, you may push them away. However, if you master this challenge, you will have people connected with you and have them feeling like, hey, you're talking directly to me. Now, I will admit I have some technology I'd set up for this. It's not working. So I'm going to explain this curse of knowledge to you. It will still make sense. I read about this in a book called, and it's a book I highly recommend, one of the top 5 books ever on communication and speaking. It's called Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath. The curse of knowledge occurs when you know your topic so well that you assume that all of your listeners know it as well as you do. So you start telling facts, you start giving terminology, use acronyms. You talk to them in a way that goes over their head, not because there's something wrong with them, not because they're dumb, it's just because they don't know your topic as well. So there's an exercise, if my technology worked, I would use for you. It's called the tapping exercise. And what I typically do when I'm in the States, I will tap out the American national anthem. And if my technology had worked, I would be tapping the Canadian national anthem right now. Now, when I do this tapping exercise in person, I tap out the song and then I ask the audience, okay, what's going on? What was that song? Please name that song. And nobody ever gets it. And then I said, well, what's wrong with you? I don't understand why you're not getting it. I'm tapping it clearly. Why aren't you getting this song? And I tap it again and I get the same reaction. They don't know what the song is. And I purposely say some things that could be construed as insulting. What's wrong with you? Why aren't you getting this? I'm tapping it out. And then I stop the exercise. And I ask them, do you not feel a little bit insulted by the way I'm talking to you? And they always say yes. And there's a reason for all this, and it'll make sense to you in just a moment. So then I say, the problem with the tapping exercise is when I'm tapping the song, I can hear the song in my head, but I didn't tell you the name of the song. I just said it's a well-known song. And there are hundreds of thousands of well-known songs. So I'm up here tapping a song I can hear in my head, but you're just hearing a bunch of indiscriminate taps. When that happens, that creates miscommunication. Clarity and context are critical to effective communication. So if I had just told this story about me being on top of a desk and then didn't explain that that held me back for 25 years, and then one day my boss insulted me and threatened my job, which led me to Toastmasters, you might not have the context. It might not make any sense to you as to why I struggled so much as a young speaker. So make sure that you are not suffering from the what I call the curse of knowledge when you give presentations. That was the Canadian national anthem I wanted to play. So clarity is key in our communication. Lack of clarity, I believe, is the root of all miscommunication and disagreement between human beings. How do we overcome this? Well, first of all, as Toastmasters, and when we're getting evaluations, one of the key questions to ask is, what was not clear? What terminology did I use? What assumptions did I make? What did I say that wasn't clear to you that got me either bogged down in the story or took me on a path that just didn't make sense to me? Have the courage to ask that question, because it will clear up so much and will help you have so much more impact. So as a speaker, as a storyteller, and forget Toastmasters and speaking for a moment, as a person in your day-to-day communications with others, the next time you find yourself frustrated, don't think of, don't look at the other person and think, what's wrong with you? I'm speaking clearly. No, ask yourself this question. Am I tapping a song they can't understand? For my contestants in the room, I competed several times, many years, and made it to the what's now called the semifinals, made it to the regionals a couple times. That's a pretty good contest success. But more than once, I would compete and not get the trophy and have this thought: those judges are dumb. What is wrong with them? They're stupid. I was clear, right? Everyone who's competed and not won a contest has had that thought, right? Well, if that thought creeps its way into your head next time, ask yourself this question: was I tapping a song they couldn't understand? And then go back and revisit. And almost every time I've talked to somebody who's had the courage to ask the question, they'll say, yeah, I can see where I wasn't clear. So this is critical to all communication, but for speaking and storytelling, make sure you ask that question if you feel like you're not making an impact. Don't be surprised by the answers you get, but it will speed up your growth, I promise. All right, that's the curse of knowledge. Knowing how to get emotional and understanding this curse of knowledge to keep from alienating your audience is critical. But if you don't master this last piece, you'll still have a problem with your stories having an impact. It's called the lunch buffet effect. The idea here is don't stuff people. Now, I'm not sure about Canada or other parts of the world because we're being joined by people from all over. Here in the States, there was a concept called the lunch buffet, or the buffet, that was very popular pre-COVID. They're still around, but they're not as popular. But back in the day, it wasn't uncommon for you to get a call, if you're here in the States, from a friend who would say, hey, want to go over to the buffet for lunch? Yeah, let's go. Now, I'm partial to Chinese buffet, so I will use that as an example. So if you're not familiar with this, you go to a restaurant, instead of being served at a table, you sit at your table, but then you get up and you go to these long, I'll call them troughs. They're really just tables filled with food. And you go and you get your plate and you start to fill it up. And if you like Chinese like me, it's like, oh, there's some shrimp, there's egg rolls, and there's some shrimp, and there's some rice, and there's some, oh, look at that. What's that? Oh, that's lo mein. Let's get that. And you take this plate, heaping with food, you sit down and you take your first bite. Oh, that's good. And then you have this thought. $15 is a lot of money for one plate of food. I'm going back for more. So you finish that plate and then you go back and you load up another plate, you sit down and you eat. And you do this about 3 times. And you might even visit the dessert table. And then when you're done, you're done. You're done. You're finished for the day, right? You're so stuffed with food that all you can think is, I want a nap. What does this have to do with speaking? Have you ever in your life attended a presentation and heard a speaker or a series of people, speakers who stuffed so much information into your brain that you thought, I'm done. I can't take anymore. That's the lunch buffet effect. And I see it way too many times in speeches and stories. We want to avoid the lunch buffet effect. We don't want our audiences feeling like this when we're done. So when it comes to storytelling, never tell a story without a specific point. Sharing a story without a point is like feeding your audience fast food. If you've been to America, you know that we're masters of fast food, right? So that's empty calories. It doesn't do anything. It fills us up, but it has no impact. Give your audience just enough to leave them wanting more. Now, in speaking overall, if you're doing longer presentations, keynote speeches, et cetera, we have a rule called the 10-to-1 rule, which means for every 10 minutes of speaking time, give them 1 point and 1 point only. Now, you might support that point with a story or some research or a vignette, but no more than that. In storytelling, give no more than 3 details for your scenes or your characters. Think about my opening story on the desk. I gave you 3 details. It was dark. There was rain hitting the window, and you could smell the cookies, or the chocolate chip cookies and the cupcakes. That was it. One of the biggest challenges I see with storytellers is they give way too many details and backstories. It becomes a novel and people lose interest. Set up the scene, set up the character, and get into the conflict as soon as possible. That will help your story have much more impact. All right, avoid the lunch buffet effect. Don't cram in so much that you leave your audiences feeling like this guy. Don't want to do that to them. All right, in honoring my own teachings, I will say that is enough. That's enough for one presentation. Now, you've heard about getting emotional. You've heard about the curse of knowledge, and you've heard about the lunch buffet effect. Incorporate these into your stories. You will have much more impact. So what we'd like to know in the chat box is, what are some takeaways for you? What are some insights into storytelling you didn't have before this hour started? We're going to get to Q&A in just a moment. And I do want to make one offer to you. This is a complimentary resource. It's called Storytelling Insights. Marcus was so kind in his thoughts about talking about my book. That book was born from these storytelling insights. If you want to triple your skills as a storyteller in 1 year, 3 times the impact, 3 times the number of clients, 3 times the number of new employees, this will help you do that. You get a weekly 5-minute audio with a transcript of that lesson. And the idea is one skill builds on top of another. If you'd like to sign up for these, I'll put the address in the chat box, the link. You can also use this QR code. This QR code, the link will take you to my virtual business card. And on that virtual business card, you will see this free story insights. Just click on that, sign up for it. It's my list. Nobody else gets it. I don't sell it to anyone else. That will help you. With that, I will put in the chat box the link. I will turn this back over to our Toastmaster of the day.
Thank you, Michael. Yes, there are n number of key takeaways, but the one which I like the most is, which I have never tried and feel like trying immediately, is having only 3 details for a scene, and would like to test how audience take it. These are the two key takeaways which I would like to implement immediately.
Good.
And now the floor is open for the guests with the questions. I hope the mind is just juggling with the questions now for you all. You can raise your hand. We can unmute you for the question. You can also put your questions in the chat box. We can read the questions for you.
It looks like we're getting a wide variety of takeaways, which is good.
We have Richard Lee Ty with his hand
Richard,
up. Hand up.
Thank you, Michael.
Hi,
I'm also
Richard.
part. I'm also part of this book study group, so I have it here. One quick question I had. I'm curious what your presentation software you used today was.
I was using StreamYard.
Okay, so that
Yeah.
allows you to have all these different types of views and slides.
It does. And I know this is more about storytelling, but one of the key ideas back when the pandemic and the lockdown occurred is we were working with people on how to make a presentation virtually more appealing. Being a talking head or hiding behind slides is not effective. You got to keep it moving. So yes, I use StreamYard, Richard.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
You can put your hand up if you want to ask a question like Richard did. Oh, we've got Kevin Verbeek.
Hi, Kevin. President Kevin.
Thank you very much for a really wonderful talk and a lot of takeaways that we can apply to our speeches right away. How do you decide what that main point should be? We are often giving 5 to 7 minute speeches. So basically I can only give at most 3/4 of a point is what you're telling me. And so how do we limit and decide what is that essential point and create stories that envelop that point? Because I have all these different key takeaways and that's my kryptonite.
Well, it's a terrific question, Kevin. And you can round that 3/4 up to 1. You can make 1 point in 5 to 7 minutes. Think about our world championship speeches that we hear. They all have a good point. I like to crowdsource. And this is the curse of knowledge at its very best, is we know our ideas so well, and we have so many that, first of all, I ask, which idea resonates with me today? I mean, I've got stories I told 10 years ago that don't resonate with me anymore, so I don't tell them. But ask your audience. You may tell a story in one of your club meetings and think this is the point. But if you find that 2/3 or 3/4 of the audience says, oh no, this is the point I took away, that's a whole new perspective maybe you didn't even consider. So ask your audience, what is the point? Does that help?
I think that is helpful because I feel like I always used to have the point come from within, but I think it's great to have it come from without. And that's also a good reason why you should never give the same speech, like a new speech every time. You should hone and work on your speeches.
Yes, that's a terrific point, Kevin. One of the challenges I see with Toastmasters is this unwritten belief that we have to come up with a new story every time. You don't. The best stories are rewritten and rewritten and rewritten and tested. And now that we have global access, this is one of the positives of the pandemic. We could go to any club in the world, share our story that they've never heard and say, hey, what point did you take away? So don't be afraid to try your story elsewhere. One of the biggest problems I see with all speakers is we get bored with our own material. We don't have to. Just make a few changes, include some dialogue, throw a couple other details in there, change it up from time to time. It'll keep it fresh for you.
Thank you. That's also, I think, good advice. If you have a different audience, you might want to shuffle and change certain parts of your story. And you can be in the same room and people in Qatar and in Canada all at the same time in one meeting. So good plug on the future of Toastmasters.
Well, yes. And also you have to think about, if I'm speaking to a group in Qatar versus Western United States versus Europe, I have to look at my terminology to make sure and ask, what terms did I use that maybe you're not familiar with? All right, I have a question here from Geeta in the chat box. If you write a story and telling, can you use more than 3 details? You can. 3 is not like a limit. Don't do more than 3 or you're in trouble. But when you start getting into 5, 6, or 7, it's a concept I call pushing your audience out of the story. I have a story I tell about one of my first clients who approached me at a chamber event, a Chamber of Commerce event. And she approached me. I could tell right away, this woman was well-to-do. She had a custom-made suit and she had jewelry that looked like it came out of a Tiffany's box. Now, question for you. You can just put this in the chat box. Based on those 2 descriptions, what color was her dress or her suit? Red, red, with a question mark. Black, white, black. All right, here's the key. None of you are right, but you're all correct. What? What does that mean? She was wearing a blue suit. I didn't mention it because the color of her suit is not important to the story. By letting you pick the color of the suit, you just became a co-creator of my story. You're more emotionally engaged. So don't over explain your details. Let your audience play a role in doing that, and they feel like they're part of it. That's what I mean by pushing people out. If you over describe it, you push them out. Is it Gilda?
Yes, it is.
Oh, hi, Gilda.
If you're telling a story for over 15 minutes, say 15 to 20 minutes, or a presentation, can you have two stories? One for the opening and the detail, and one to explain your conclusion? Or that's too many?
You can have two stories, just make sure they're connected in some way and still support the main point. You can also do what's called a suspended story. You can start a story, stop it, get into your presentation, and come back to it. So you can do it either way.
Oh, thank you.
Just make sure they support that point, because you don't want people listening to two stories that aren't connected at all and saying, well, I don't get it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Just make sure they
Thank
support
you.
that point. Sure. You're welcome. Thanks for being here. Hey, Ron.
Hi, Michael. I'd like to ask you a question that comes out of your book. And today you said you are the hero of your story, but the audience has to relate to it. Can you comment on a point that comes out of your book in different places? And that is, if you talk as if you are the hero of the story, and if you are bragging about yourself, how that turns off audiences, and maybe why the reasons that happens.
Yes, I like this question, Ron. Let's get clear on this term hero, because a lot of people are uncomfortable with it. A hero doesn't mean you have to, we all have this definition of hero, and it's often the media portrays these heroic people, and we think that's not me. That's not the meaning of the term hero in storytelling. It is a heroic journey, which means someone who faced a problem, who could not solve it on his or her own, needed help. A guide, some wise person comes in and gives advice that helps solve the problem. The person overcomes the obstacle, succeeds, and has a new and better life. That's what we mean by heroic. To your question, Ron, about let's use an example. And I go to these conferences. My partner's in real estate. She does a lot of real estate investing. And I go to some of these real estate investment seminars. And these people will stand to the front of the room and say, you know, I was struggling for so long. And then one day I woke up, I had this idea. And because of that idea, in 19 months, I was debt free. I wiped out 100,000 worth of debt. And now I've got houses on each of the coasts. I've got a beautiful family, and I did this, and I'm thinking, yeah, I've heard enough about you. You did not solve your problem that way. Your problem was solved when you went to somebody and said, I can't solve this on my own. Can you help? That is the story of the person that we don't like to hear, who it's all about them. The person who's willing to say, I struggled, I had these problems, and I needed help. That's the story we're drawn to. You can be the hero in that story. You're the one who's going through that heroic journey of struggle and difficulty, needing help and overcoming it. On the other hand, you can also be the other person in that story who, and this is often what I tell people in business. If you're a coach, for example, or a salesperson, tell the story of a client who was struggling before that person met you. And then after meeting you, you gave some wisdom and insight, and that person overcame the problem, took the new actions, and succeeded. But one of the key ways that we do that without coming across as a braggart is to use dialogue in our stories. Have the people who have benefited from your work brag about you for you. Does that help, Ron?
Totally. There's always a mentor in the story. If it's a good story.
If it's a good story, it has a mentor, and the mentor provides the wisdom, and then the main character.
And if that mentor is missing, people just get turned off from the story.
Yes, exactly. That's exact. Couldn't put it better, right? They get turned off. It's like, you didn't solve this on your own. We know that. That's not how people succeed. So thanks for that question, Ron. Hi, Randy.
Hi, Michael. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Yeah, thanks for that. That was really amazing. My question's about, I've always been fascinated about how you develop all the different parts of the story, the dialogue within a story. So if I go back to early days, how do I remember everything that happened? Or is it a case that maybe you add some extra information to it? Or how do you do that, going back in the days and getting the dialogue within the story?
Oh, I love this question, Randy. I'm so glad you asked this, because write this down, everyone, somewhere. Your story has to be true. It doesn't have to be 100% factual. What does that mean? It means that it has to have happened. But think about this. I'm 59 years old. I can't remember what I said to somebody 2 days ago, much less 50 years ago. So what we're looking for here is not the actual truth. What we're looking for is the emotional truth. Did my teacher say to me, Michael, since you love standing on your desk so much, I'm going to let you do that during nap time? Is those the exact words she said? I don't think so. But it was the way she said it. And my reaction was, oh, I get to have fun again. That's dialogue that we create to the best of our recollection. It's the emotion that came through it. Did I stand there on my desk and say, I just want to get down? I don't know if I said those exact words, but I hope my emotion came through. I was total humiliation. I just wanted to get down and never be seen again. I hope that came through. I don't know. And you know what? I say it a little bit different every time. And this is one of the biggest obstacles to effective storytelling I see, is this idea of memorization. We got to stop memorizing. Memorization kills authenticity. It kills connection, because we get so caught up on, what was that first word? I don't know what I said 53 years ago standing on a desk. I don't, but I do know how I felt. And if I can recreate that as closely as possible, we're going to have a connection. And what I mentioned before about getting bored with your story, change up the dialogue every so often. Nobody's going to come up to you, Randy or Roshan or Vincent or any of us, and say, you know, Randy, I really like that story, but did your teacher really say it like that? They don't do that. So thank you for asking that. That is one of the biggest challenges I see, is we get too caught up in, well, I don't remember what it said. Don't worry about what you said. How did you say it? How did you feel? It will come through to us and you will make your point.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Roshan.
Hi, Michael. That was a
Hi.
very insightful and very informative speech. Thank you so
Good.
much.
Oh, thanks.
I just have a question. Any tips, or what is your favorite way to begin and end a story?
I like to jump right in. You can ask a question. One way is to do, like I asked today, what did you like to do when you were a kid? And if you ask a question, give your audience long enough to think about it, and then just jump right into the opening. I mean, for me, I like to entertain people. I find a lot of times there's too much, there's too much backstory, or just not getting into the action as soon as possible. So a question's okay, but I typically just like to jump in. Now, there is one other way, and that is to call back to something that's happened in the meeting. Today, I did that because Marcus did share a piece of information I didn't know, and I wanted to acknowledge that. But typically, jump right in.
Okay,
That
thank
help,
you so
Roshan?
much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, certainly. Thank you.
Sure. All right. Let's see. I see a couple in here. Abdullah asks, How to use the power of storytelling to communicate and sell yourself for a job opportunity, business venture, scholarship when different people on the board of decision. All right, not knowing all the details, Abdullah, what I would say to you is that tell a story about a time where you overcame a challenge related to this job or this business venture or this scholarship. So if you want to get into a particular school, for example, talk about a challenge that you overcame that helped you get closer to getting to that school, but you're not quite there. Or maybe you have this job. Why is it an experience from your life that created a desire for you to have this job or do this kind of work in particular? And if you want to come on and talk a little bit about it, I'm happy to do that with you, but hopefully that at least gets you started. Geeta, did anyone in particular inspire you the most? Yes, my friend Darren LaCroix. Darren is the 2001 world champion of public speaking. You may know him through Toastmasters. I met him through David Brooks, who I mentioned in the presentation. David introduced me to Darren the year after Darren won the world championship. Darren had a style that just connected with me. And so I asked him to become my mentor. Literally, it was 20 years ago in June, because I still have the date, because in order to be my mentor, I had to pass a test. I didn't know it was a test at the time. He told me to go buy a book. It was called The Book on Comedy. Now, Darren's background was in comedy. I don't want to be a comedian. But during the day, when I saw him speak the first time, he told this story of one of his mentors who had told Darren, I will help you. I'll give you time on a comedy stage anytime you want. But if you ever turn me down, I will never help you again. So the day that I asked Darren to be my mentor and he told me to read this book, I remembered that story in a flash. And I said, okay, I'll buy the book and read it. And because I read the book, I called him a week later and said, okay, I read the book. What's next? He said, no one's ever read the book before. That was a test to see if you were serious. He said, I guess I'm stuck with you now. I said, you are. And 20 years later, we're still friends and he still works with me. But he inspired me. He's an inspirational individual because he's not an extroverted person. He's an introvert. He's not had in some ways, he had a sheltered life. He'll say this to you, but he also he struggled. And he is a world champion, certified speaking professional, accredited speaker through Toastmasters. So he has been an inspiration and still motivates me to this day. Thank you for asking. I don't get that question often. I'm in district leadership and I'm often needing to deliver information. So boring. How do I decide what to leave out? Mary, what I would suggest is think of stories that you can tie around that information. What's a story that support? And Mary, if you don't mind coming on, let's have a quick conversation. I'll ask you for a couple of examples, but just think about how can I tie even a vignette, a short clip of a story that shows why this information is important. Hey, Mary.
Hi, good morning.
Give us an example of a piece of information you have to share.
Gosh, where to start? It's all information. That's all I'm called to do. Recent district leader meeting. I'm the administration manager. List of dates of upcoming events. Area director training in June. I have 10 minutes to how to be an area director. I mean, it's crazy to do that in 10 minutes.
As far as dates, I try to send those out because we don't remember them. We don't remember numbers that well. Send them out so we have a copy of it. But as far as district area or training, talk about how, now, have you been in that role before?
Yes.
Okay. Talk about how that changed you.
Okay.
How were you before you entered that role? How were you after? What were all the benefits? Because it might persuade other people to go for that role because they may not know, oh, that's how I can benefit from this.
So what you said, just to clarify, you're saying to show the impact on me, not to worry, fuss with the details, but yeah, like motivate, inspire people.
Exactly. Yeah. I should have said this in the presentation. The best stories are about transformation. And you don't have to give a 10-minute story, by the way. You can tell a quick 2 to 3 minute story about, hey, when I went into this role, I had these expectations and thought this and thought, oh my gosh, I've just taken on this burden. And by the end, I felt this, this, and this, and it was all positive. So just show how you transform because of the role. And if you haven't been in a role, but you're asked to talk about it, find somebody who has. There's plenty of examples of it, and just ask them for their, and then just share their story. Not a problem. Did that help, Mary? Good, good. Richard, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I have a question pertaining to your book. One thing I've incorporated into my speaking now is dialogue, because it is the heart of the story. One of the challenges I've run into is how to embody and play those different characters. Because for me, it's not quite natural to like use different accents to actually play the different characters. So I've been playing around with physical space of like, well, this is person A, and then this is person B, but it takes, it sort of breaks up the flow a bit. So I'm curious how you approach playing different characters in like an extended dialogue.
Couple of mistakes I see people make is, first of all, when we're talking about accents, and I see this with gender, I see men do this when they try to recreate women and children. They'll do, oh, hi, honey, like that. And I was like, please stop doing that because you sound ridiculous. Don't go extreme, just a slight change. And here's another way. Let's say I'm talking about my partner and I, Linda, her name's Linda. Okay, Linda's 5'6". I'm 6'2". So I may recreate a dialogue between us. So all I have to do, and by the way, don't do this travel. I see this all the time. People travel between characters. That's very distracting. All you have to do is turn on your feet. So let's say I'm going to play me having a conversation with Linda. All right. I'm me talking to Linda. I can look down a little bit because she's not as tall as me. Then when she's talking to me, I can turn and look up, down, up. And I don't have to say, and then I said to Linda, and then she said to me. No, we know from that. Also, occasionally use the character's name in the dialogue. I could say, Linda, I think we should buy the red car. I don't think so. You don't want to use the name every time, but it's pretty clear. But just shift your feet, and it's positioning and how you're looking at the character. Don't change the voice. Maybe a slight change, but don't worry about changing your voice as much. As quick position, keep it smooth up and down. And I know we're closing in on the bottom of the hour. I'll stay longer if it'll help answer questions, no problem at all. And I will get to the next hand that's raised, but I did want to get to Deepti. She asked what to do if you're stuck in the opening of a speech and the rest of the speech is in place. Test. This is the beauty of Toastmasters. It is a terrific laboratory. Try different ideas. Try a different opening. The subject of dialogue has come up. You can take us right into your head at the beginning of the story. The desk story, I have tested it in the past and started with, so there I was standing on a desk thinking, I just want to get down. So immediately people are like, what's this about? So test different openings to your story. Hopefully did that help, Deepti? Yes, and this is the best laboratory on the planet to test speech and story ideas, because it isn't going to cost you anything but a few minutes of time. It might make a huge difference. Hi, Ahmad.
Hi, Michael. So I'm reading the book right now, and it's been super helpful. And I also really appreciate what you shared today. It's been amazing too. What I'm wondering is, how do you prepare for a Q&A as much as possible? And have you been in any situations where one of the Q&A questions or thoughts were just like they really didn't like what you shared? And how did you go about that as in a smooth way as possible?
Okay, let's go to the first question, which I appreciate both of those. Number one, and I was a little bit looser about it today because the club controls it more, but when I'm in a formal keynote, if I do a Q&A, I will say, we have 5 minutes for questions and answers, and then I'll have my closing thoughts. Try your best never to close on questions and answers, because people remember the last word you say. And if the last word was one of those off the wall questions that take you down a rabbit hole, it loses your impact. So you control, and never say, I've got time for 3 questions, because some of those questions might become novels. Right? So the way you can try to keep people from that is say, what is your short, specific question? I didn't do that here. I didn't feel I needed to. You're Toastmasters. But in some corporate gig, I'll have to say, what are your short, specific questions? And when that happens and somebody starts to go off on a tangent, I'll say, pardon me, I want to respect your time. What is your question? We have to maintain control of that. Number 2, what do you do if the question is off the wall? It's out of left, as we say here in the States, out of left field, or it's maybe combative. You can, the first attempt to, I might even say you sound a little angry, you sound upset. So acknowledge the emotion that you're feeling from them. That usually will diffuse it. The second time, I will say, it sounds like a question that we need to discuss offline. I will talk with you after this meeting if you want to. I've never had it gone beyond that. If it does, in those rare cases, and I think too many people are afraid of those hostile hecklers and all that, it's rare. But if it does, you could say, I just don't think this is the right, we're just not going to see eye to eye on this. And I don't want to, always take it back to the audience. I want to respect everyone else's time. If you want to talk to me over here afterwards, I'm happy to do that, but we need to keep this moving. Make sense?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah. And look, I've been speaking in Toastmasters for 28 years. I have never had an audience member just get downright abusive in that. We've had people disagree. You can respectfully disagree and move on. Abdullah.
Yeah, hello.
Hi, I started to answer your question. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to do it without talking with you.
Yeah, I appreciate your advice and appreciate your time and the professional presentation you've made.
Sure.
Honestly, right now I am a American Moroccan logistics manager, and
Okay.
I've been working in the logistics industry for about 10 years now. And right now I moved to Europe. I'm in Germany. And this was my first time writing a CV, a resume, because
Okay.
I never had to do that before. I just naturally found jobs and worked my way up across consulting firms and various logistical firms. And right now I'm faced with the challenge of actually having to sell myself to strangers, like to people that do not know me, do not know my background, and have no related connections to my previous established network.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. Are you still trying to stay in logistics?
And right now, yes, for the time being, but at the same time, in parallel, I'm working on a company that I'm starting up, and in parallel, I'm trying to get a scholarship to an executive MBA. So that's why my question was quite spread out.
Gotcha. Okay. So let's take the logistics company, even if it's short term. Look at all the other resumes that are out there. They all look the same, essentially. What I very rarely see in resumes is a story that says, why was I attracted to logistics and why do I like it today? Even though you're not planning long-term to stay, but why do you still want to stay in logistics? Just give a quick story, something from your childhood. It could be, what is something from your logistics world that you still like? And just build a story around that. It could be something from childhood where a grandparent or a parent, you had an experience with that individual that said, oh, and you could tie it to logistics. That humanizes you more rather than I've been in logistics 10 years and I like people and all that. Everybody says that, but you've got a story that no one else can duplicate. You can take that same approach when going for the scholarship. This is why I want this scholarship with this university, just tied to something in your life experience that connects to that particular institution. You're going to stand out.
All right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense.
Good. Hope that helps.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Sure. Ahmad, did you have a follow-up question? I see your hand is still up.
Oh, I didn't. I'm sorry. I forgot
That's
to
okay. No problem.
color
Just
it.
want to make sure I didn't miss one. All right. What do you do if you're stuck in the opening of a speech? And yeah, we talked about testing that. Judy Carter is the book on comedy. Any tips on delivering a humorous speech? Yes, do not try to insert humor. It falls flat. Don't tell jokes. For years in the speaking business, people were told, open up with a joke. Big mistake for several reasons. Number one, what if it's not funny? You're already in trouble. Number two, the joke often doesn't relate to the topic at hand. That doesn't mean don't be funny. Go back and watch the World Championships from the last few years. Even the virtual presentations had humor, even though you couldn't hear it from an audience. So stories are the source of humor. It's the unexpected line. It's the unexpected reaction. And often it's not a line, it is a reaction. There is a line that often gets a laugh from me where I talk about this curse of knowledge. And I used to be a financial advisor. And the point that I try to make about being a financial advisor is too many of them talk in their language. So it's like sitting down, imagine you're sitting down with your financial advisor and the person looks to you and says, now, based on this year's alpha, we expected much better returns, but the betas come in a lot lower than we expected. And the standard deviation has put us in flux, which heading into Q4, though, we think that's going to change based on the recent actions of the Fed. Huh? Just the huh gets a laugh, right? And the reaction before the huh. So that's a real life situation. Don't have to go to a joke book or anything else. Just if you develop this habit of moments, start putting humorous moments in there. They're there. We just need to look at them from a different perspective. And the other thing about humor is don't always be the person with the funny line. Be willing to be the setup person or be the butt of the joke. Did you laugh when you saw this? Right? Most audiences I have do. Well, there weren't any words being said and I was being laughed at. And I'm okay with people laughing because the humor actually sets up the pain, which is later relieved. All right. I don't see any other questions in the chat box. I hope I didn't miss any. Any other questions from the group that's still here? All right, before I hand this over, I retired from financial planning in 2018 to do this full time, this being coaching, training, and speaking. I believe I was called to do this. And what drives me every day is that every person I meet has a valuable story and experiences to share. I cannot remember in my 59 years a time of more conflict, of more disagreement, of just anger. And I don't know about other parts of the world, but here in the States, it's palpable. I believe that if we could each sit down with one another for 5 minutes and share each other's story about where we come from, the global temperature would drop about 20 degrees. I mean, it would be so much less conflict and stress. We have an obligation as speakers and storytellers to get out there and tell our stories. Because every time we speak to a group, whether it's in person or online, there are people wearing masks. And I'm not talking COVID here. They're wearing emotional masks. They'll tell you, oh, I'm fine, I'm okay. But they're hurting in some way, financially, physically, emotionally, relationship, something's going on. And you might be that person who tells the story that gives them the hope they need to keep going on. Don't discount the power of your own story. Take what you learned today, incorporate what makes sense to you, get out there and share it. I promise you, you and I will have a bigger impact on the world than we can realize. Thank you so much for being here today. I trust that you gained some value, and I look forward to seeing you at a future meeting somewhere on this planet. Turn it back over to our Toastmaster.
Thank you, Michael.
Sure.
That was an insightful session. And today I have a story which I would like to work upon and take a call for action. Now over to President Marcus.
Thank you very much, Toastmaster of the Day, Nagalakshmi. I want to thank everyone for attending today. We've had a very large turnout, and I've had some people asking me, Marcus, can we get a copy of the recording? Yes, you can. I do have everyone's email address who registered, and I will be sending out a link to the recording to all those emails. So that's one. I also want to thank very much Pooja Saran. I did thank her earlier for designing the flyer, but she also designed this virtual background. So thank you very much, Pooja. You are a splendid graphic artist. And I also want to say, we often have heard the term or the phrase, mums know best. So I want to say, thank you, Mum, for buying me this book for Christmas. My mom.
Here. Hey, I agree.
And my mom is my hero. How's that for a story? I also want to thank Michael, obviously, for giving us your time today. A good hour and a half, maybe a bit longer. You gave, obviously, a penetrating presentation, fabulous Q&A answers, and lots of key takeaways that we all can learn from. We truly appreciate your knowledge about how to develop impactful stories. Just a few takeaways that I had. Have something of value to share to your audience. We buy into key confidence, have a bank of stories. The best stories are about transformation, but get up, set up your scene, and get into the conflict as soon as possible. Thank you once again, everyone. I heard some countries were listed: Mexico, UK, Canada, USA, Qatar, India, Germany. You know where you're from. This is certainly a world event. Quickly, I want to mention Connected Communicators meets Wednesday mornings at 7 in the morning Mountain Time. So the UK is 7 hours ahead of that. 8 hours ahead of that, I think. No, 7, right, 7. We both had time changes recently. And Club Toasted meets on Saturdays at 7 a.m. Mountain Time or 5 p.m. Qatar Time. So thank you once again, everyone, for showing up. And I certainly will be sending out the link to the recording. Thank you once again, Michael, for your time and for fabulous information that we're all going to take away and bring our best to storytelling.
Thanks, Marcus.
All right. Have a great day, everyone.
All right.
See you later.